Nobody expected this story to survive past a few screenshots and a late-night tweet thread, but within hours, it wasn't just trending. It was detonating across the internet like a rumor nobody could fully trace back to its origin. An $8 million cocaine shipment. Hidden inside a luxury underwear delivery allegedly linked, directly or indirectly, to one of the most recognizable names in global pop culture. Kim Kardashian. No police report. No confirmed federal statement. No verified chain of custody. Just whispers, screenshots, and a digital wildfire spreading faster than fact-checkers could keep up. And yet, the question refused to die. How does a story this explosive even begin? And why did millions of people believe it before anyone had proof? Because buried inside this viral claim isn't just a scandal. It's a reflection of how celebrity, money, and misinformation now collide in real time, forming narratives that feel true even when the facts remain completely unverified. But before we go any further, one thing has to be made absolutely clear. According to public records and credible reporting at the time of this narration, there is no verified evidence confirming that Kim Kardashian was involved in any cocaine-related shipment, hidden or otherwise. The entire premise exists in the chaotic ecosystem of online rumor culture, where speculation often evolves faster than truth. And still, the story spread. To understand why, you have to understand the world this rumor attached itself to. Kim Kardashian is not just a celebrity. She is an ecosystem. Fashion, beauty, legal reform advocacy, billion-dollar branding, and one of the most documented private lives in modern entertainment history. Every package sent to her orbit, every brand collaboration, every appearance is dissected in real time by millions. Which is exactly why this particular rumor didn't need confirmation to go viral. It only needed proximity. And proximity is where modern internet storytelling becomes dangerous. Because once a narrative attaches itself to a global figure like Kardashian, truth becomes optional, and engagement becomes everything. But where did this specific claim even come from? Early traces of the rumor, according to archived social media threads, appear fragmented, disconnected posts mentioning luxury shipments, intercepted packages, and alleged customs discoveries. None of them provided official documentation. None of them pointed to a verified law enforcement bulletin. Yet the details escalated anyway. From vague claims to precise dollar amounts. From anonymous packages to high-end fashion contexts. And eventually, to one of the most sensationalized versions of the story yet. An $8 million cocaine seizure allegedly tied to a delivery involving luxury underwear. The moment those words combined, the internet did what it always does when shock outweighs clarity. It amplified. But amplification is not confirmation. And that's where this story takes a darker turn, not into crime, but into perception. Because the real story here is not whether the event happened. It's how quickly millions accepted that it could have. Within hours, comment sections turned into battlefields. Some users dismissed the rumor immediately, pointing out the lack of credible sourcing. Others treated it like an unfolding exposé, connecting unrelated dots, building theories out of aesthetics rather than evidence. And in the middle of it all, one question kept resurfacing. If this isn't real, why does it feel like it could be? That question is where we go next. Because to understand the viral explosion of this claim, we need to step into the machinery behind modern celebrity misinformation. The algorithmic pressure, the audience psychology, and the economic incentives that reward shock over truth. But just when it seems like this is only about the internet, the narrative takes another turn. Because the moment a celebrity name enters a criminal allegation, real or alleged, the consequences stop being digital. They become cultural, and sometimes irreversible. In the next part, we go deeper into how a rumor like this forms, who benefits from it, and why stories involving global celebrities rarely die quietly, even when there is no evidence they were ever real to begin with. And by the time you see how the pieces actually connect, you may start to question not just this story, but every viral story you thought you understood. The first real crack in the story didn't come from journalists. It came from confusion. Because when people tried to trace the $8 million cocaine underwear delivery claim back to a single, verifiable source, something strange happened. There wasn't one. No official customs statement. No court filing. No law enforcement press briefing. No confirmed investigative report. Just a chain of reposts, screenshots, and commentary accounts speaking about it with increasing confidence, as if repetition itself was evidence. And that's where this story stops being about a rumor and starts becoming about how modern viral reality is constructed. Because somewhere between the first post and the millionth share, the claim changed shape. Not through facts, but through momentum. Early versions of the story, according to archived social posts, were vague, almost cautious in tone. They mentioned alleged intercepted shipments and luxury goods being investigated. But as the engagement grew, so did the specificity. Dollar amounts appeared. Names were implied. Context was added where none existed. And then, almost surgically, the narrative attached itself to a familiar anchor, Kim Kardashian. Not because there was evidence connecting her to anything criminal, but because her name guaranteed attention at scale. This is where investigative analysts of internet culture often point to a predictable pattern: the proximity trap. A high-profile figure doesn't need to be involved in a story for their identity to become the gravitational center of it. They only need to be recognizable enough to hold attention. And once that happens, accuracy becomes secondary to virality. By the time major social platforms caught up to the trend, the story had already evolved beyond its origin. It wasn't a claim anymore. It was a narrative ecosystem. Short-form videos began circulating with dramatic voiceovers, some explicitly stating it as fact, others carefully using phrasing like reportedly or allegedly, but still presenting the same underlying image: luxury fashion, international shipping, and a massive hidden narcotics seizure. The visuals did most of the work. Even without evidence, the human brain tries to complete the picture. Expensive brands, private jets, celebrity culture, crime headlines. The combination triggers a kind of cognitive shortcut. If it looks like something that could happen in that world, the mind stops asking whether it actually did. And that's where engagement turns into belief. But behind the scenes, something else was happening entirely. Fact-checkers and journalists who began looking into the claim reported a consistent issue: every lead dissolved under scrutiny. No matching customs seizure record could be found corresponding to the alleged $8 million figure tied to the described scenario. No credible outlet corroborated the underwear shipment angle. And no law enforcement agency issued statements aligning with the viral narrative. Still, the story didn't slow down. In fact, the absence of verification only made it more attractive to certain corners of the internet. Because ambiguity creates space for interpretation, and interpretation spreads faster than correction. By the second wave of virality, the narrative had split into competing versions. One version framed it as a misunderstanding blown out of proportion. Another treated it as a suppressed scandal being ignored by mainstream media. And a third, completely detached from evidence, presented it as a confirmed but underreported incident. 3 stories. Same origin point. None verified. And yet all of them circulating at once, feeding into each other like mirrors reflecting distortions instead of truth. At this stage, something important happens psychologically. Repetition begins to replace verification. When enough people repeat a claim, the brain starts to downgrade skepticism. Not because the claim is proven, but because it feels socially validated. And that's when celebrities become particularly vulnerable targets in the digital age. Because their visibility creates constant narrative pressure. Every absence of information is interpreted as concealment. Every silence is interpreted as implication. Every unrelated event is reframed as evidence. And the Kardashian name, already one of the most heavily scrutinized in modern entertainment, becomes a magnet for that kind of interpretive storytelling. But even then, there was still no confirmed event. Only acceleration. The turning point, the moment this shifted from rumor to full-scale viral phenomenon, came when commentary accounts began framing the story as a breaking situation, despite no new factual developments. That phrase alone changed everything. Because once something is labeled breaking, the audience stops asking whether it is true and starts asking what they are missing. Curiosity replaces skepticism. And curiosity is far more contagious. Within hours, engagement skyrocketed. Reaction videos appeared. Theories multiplied. Comment sections turned into investigative boards, with users attempting to reverse engineer a criminal case out of fragments that were never evidence in the first place. And still, no official confirmation emerged. Not because it was being hidden, but because there was nothing concrete to confirm. But at this point in the cycle, truth no longer controls the narrative. Momentum does. And momentum was now moving faster than any correction could catch. In the next part, we step into the center of the chaos, the social media war, where belief and disbelief collide in real time, where influencers amplify uncertainty for attention, and where a single unverified claim becomes something far larger than a story. It becomes a digital battlefield where no one is fully sure what they're fighting for anymore. The moment the story hit its third wave of virality, it stopped behaving like a rumor. It started behaving like a conflict. Because now it wasn't just something people were talking about. It had split the internet into opposing camps. And neither side needed proof anymore. One side treated the claim as entertainment, just another outrageous celebrity headline in an endless feed of scandals, real or imagined. The other side treated it like evidence of something bigger: corruption, secrecy, and hidden systems operating behind luxury branding and global fame. And in the middle of both was the complete absence of verified information. That absence, instead of calming things down, only made the argument louder. On short-form video platforms, the narrative evolved again. Now it wasn't just a rumor. It was being framed, sometimes carefully, sometimes irresponsibly, as a developing situation. The phrasing mattered. Because developing suggests motion, even when nothing is actually changing. And audiences, scrolling fast, rarely stop to ask the most important question. Developing from what? No one could point to a confirmed starting point. No official case file. No verified seizure report matching the viral description. No public statement from customs or law enforcement confirming the core allegation. But the content didn't need those things anymore. It had emotion. It had scale. And it had names people already recognized. That combination is what turns uncertainty into virality. Creators began stitching the story together in different ways. Some added dramatic narration, slowing their voices for effect. Others leaned into fast-paced editing, flashing luxury imagery, police lights, shipping containers, courtroom sketches, visual cues that signal crime, even when no specific crime has been proven. The brain fills in the gaps automatically, and once those gaps are filled emotionally, they become resistant to correction. Because now, for many viewers, the story doesn't feel like speculation. It feels like memory. That's the moment misinformation becomes culturally sticky. Meanwhile, comment sections turned into something closer to digital courtrooms. Users debated not just whether the story was true, but what it would mean if it were true. Some argued it would expose deeper vulnerabilities in luxury logistics networks. Others insisted it revealed how easily celebrity proximity can be weaponized for clout. And then there were the third group, those who didn't fully believe it, but engaged with it anyway, because engagement itself had become the point. This is where modern viral ecosystems become self-sustaining. A claim doesn't need verification to survive. It only needs interaction. Every reaction video, every skeptical breakdown, every debunk attempt that still repeats the headline, each one keeps the phrase alive. Each one feeds the algorithm. Each one pushes the story further into recommendation feeds where context is stripped away. At that stage, even criticism becomes distribution. And the Kardashian name, once again, acts like a frictionless engine for attention. Not because of evidence, but because of familiarity. People don't need background explanation. They already know the context or think they do. But behind all of this noise, one thing remained unchanged. No confirmed report had ever validated the core allegation. No official agency had acknowledged the existence of an $8 million cocaine seizure connected to the scenario being described. No credible investigative outlet had published supporting documentation. And yet, the story continued to behave as if those confirmations existed somewhere just out of reach. That gap, the space between no evidence and widely believed, is where modern internet culture lives. And it raises a difficult question that nobody in the feed really stops to answer. If something spreads everywhere, feels specific, and is repeated with confidence, at what point does the audience stop asking whether it's real and start asking why it shouldn't be? That psychological shift is exactly what drives the final stage of the cycle. Because once belief becomes emotionally invested, the story no longer needs updates. It only needs reinforcement. In the next part, we move away from the chaos of online reactions and into the human cost of narratives like this, how celebrity families, brands, and reputations absorb even unverified storms, and why silence in the face of viral speculation is often interpreted as something far more damaging than denial. And as this story continues to unfold in the public imagination, the line between accusation and entertainment becomes harder to see with every share. By the time the story reached its fourth wave, something subtle had changed in the way people were talking about it. The language had hardened. What began as allegedly and reportedly had, in many corners of the internet, quietly shifted into something more absolute in tone, even when no new evidence had appeared. That shift is important, because it reveals what happens when a narrative survives long enough in a viral environment. Qualifiers begin to disappear, not because facts emerge, but because repetition creates familiarity. And familiarity, in the digital age, often gets mistaken for truth. But behind the scenes, nothing about the core claim had changed. There was still no verified documentation of an $8 million cocaine seizure tied to the scenario described in the viral posts. No official statement from customs authorities aligning with the details being circulated. No credible investigative confirmation of the alleged underwear delivery connection. The story, in its most literal sense, remained unsubstantiated, yet its impact had already moved beyond verification. Because at this stage, the story wasn't operating as a factual claim anymore, it was operating as a reputational force. And reputational forces behave differently. For someone like Kim Kardashian, whose public identity is built on visibility, branding, and constant media interaction, the mere association with a criminal allegation, verified or not, creates a kind of informational shadow. Even if the claim is later dismissed, the emotional residue of it can persist in public memory longer than the correction ever will. That's not because people are irrational. It's because narrative impressions form faster than factual updates. And once formed, they are difficult to fully erase. Media analysts often describe this as the asymmetry of attention. A single viral claim can reach millions in hours, while a correction may take days to appear, and even then, it rarely travels at the same speed or emotional intensity. So by the time any clarification or skepticism circulates, the audience has already emotionally moved on to the next story. And this one had already done its job. Brands and PR professionals, even without acknowledging the specifics of the rumor, understand this dynamic deeply. In modern celebrity culture, silence is never neutral. It is interpreted, sometimes as strategy, sometimes as avoidance, sometimes unfairly as implication. But in reality, silence is often just absence of engagement with something that has no factual foundation to engage with in the first place. Still, perception doesn't wait for clarification. Online, the conversation began to evolve again, this time into reflection. Not about whether the story was true, but about why it felt so believable in the first place. Some users pointed to the broader cultural environment, the constant exposure to luxury, excess, and scandal-driven celebrity coverage that makes extreme narratives feel normal. Others blamed algorithmic systems that prioritize emotional engagement over accuracy, pushing the most provocative interpretations to the top of feeds. And a third group, perhaps the most revealing, simply accepted the story as part of the modern information landscape, something not necessarily proven, but impossible to fully ignore once encountered. This is where the deeper consequence emerges. Not the rumor itself, but the normalization of uncertainty. Because when audiences become accustomed to consuming information without resolution, without verification, and without closure, the threshold for belief begins to shift. Stories no longer need to be confirmed to be influential. They only need to be seen. And once seen, they become part of the cultural background noise that shapes perception of public figures whether or not they are ever substantiated. Meanwhile, for the individuals at the center of such narratives, the experience is very different from how it appears online. What the internet experiences as a trend is, in reality, a fragmented storm of attention. Millions of disconnected interpretations happening simultaneously, none of which can be fully controlled or uniformly addressed. And even when a claim fades from trending pages, it doesn't always disappear. It lingers in search results. It lingers in reposted clips. It lingers in the memory of people who only saw the headline, not the context. That lingering effect is where modern reputational risk lives. Not in confirmed events, but in unverified repetition. And as this particular story gradually dissolves into the larger cycle of internet virality, it leaves behind a more uncomfortable reflection than the rumor itself ever contained. Because the real question isn't whether this specific claim was true or false. It's how many other stories like it exist right now, circulating, evolving, and being believed, without ever crossing the threshold of verification. And in a world where attention moves faster than truth can catch up, that question doesn't fade when the trend does. It stays, quietly shaping what people are willing to believe next. And maybe that's the most unsettling part of all. Not the scandal people thought they saw, but how easily the idea of it spread without ever needing